In this video, we're going to take a look at the different kinds of web hosting that is available, and we'll try to cover this in a little bit of depth. Now, this would help you when you set out to set up your business, because it puts you into perspective about the kinds of web hosting you should pick up. It also helps you to better explain your clients' needs and to help them choose what hosting services is most appropriate to them based on their need per time. So it's very important that you have a good understanding of the different kinds of web hosting available. And we're going to take a look at these web hostings, these web hosting classes, and how they work, and how providers classify, and what is expected of you for each of these web hosting types. Now, if you come back to HostGator, the best way to understand this is actually to look at live examples. If you come back to a site like HostGator.com, you would see under their hosting, the pro hosting, for instance, you would see that right here, they have three types of hosting. They have what we call a reseller hosting, they have VPS hosting, and then they have what we call a dedicated hosting. Now, if you look at the home page here carefully, you would also see that they have this kind of hosting here called a shared hosting. Now, the first type of hosting that most people who get into web hosting, or people who start online, are first introduced to is usually the shared hosting kinds of servers. For most people who get started online, when I was getting started online also, the first kind of web hosting I got is a shared hosting server. Now, shared hosting usually by nature is easier to get started with, and you find most providers and most people who are getting started get started with shared hosting environments, and usually these shared hosting environments are really, really cheap. For instance, if you're going to get started with shared hosting right now as your choice of web hosting, you'll find out that you're getting shared hosting for just about $2.75 per month. So for most people who are getting started, what they get first is usually a shared hosting environment. Now, the thing about a shared hosting environment is, just as the name implies, you will be sharing server resources with a lot of other people. So you have a lot of people on the same server, and all of them are running their website on that same server. And then what you now get is that the moment you need more computing power, say for instance, the moment you want to have, probably you want to have something like a SaaS application, that is software as a service going, or you need something that requires that you do a bit of work on your server, you find out that the shared hosting environment cannot cater for your needs, and you would need to go for a higher or a better hosting platform. So the key thing here is that for a shared hosting environment, what you have is that you have a lot of customers using, or a lot of websites are available on that hosting space. So it's a computer where you have so many people using those resources at the same time. The RAM is being used at the same time and shared with a lot of people. The CPU is being shared with a lot of people, and then depending on the kind of provider you are using, it can have an impact on your site. Now, the next type of hosting, the moment you leave the shared hosting, is what we call the VPS, virtual private servers. Now, a virtual private server is a server where your resources are they are allocated to you. So for instance, if you get 250 gig RAM, if you get 250 gigabytes of hard disk space, or you get 500 gigabytes of hard disk space, and you get 4 gigabytes of RAM, you know that, okay, I have 4 gigabytes of RAM, I have 250 or 500 gigabytes of hard drive. And then you now find out that when you're on a VPS server, you have less people, or less you have less websites, or less people, or less individuals sharing the resources of the server. So usually you have more computing power. Then also for a shared, or for a VPS server, you have more control. For instance, you can decide, oh, I need to restart my server. If you want to restart your server on a VPS server, you could just go there and then do a reboot of your server. On a shared hosting server, you cannot do that. So a VPS server gives you more freedom. And then as your needs and your understanding of the web hosting industry increases, you'll find out that a VPS server is actually the best bet to really go for when you want to get started. We'll cover this when we want to pick a provider, and then we'll look at how you can work with a VPS server. Now, the third kind of server environment is what we call a dedicated hosting. Now, in dedicated hosting, what you have is that you have a server all to yourself. So there is a server that is all to yourself. So if you are getting a server that has 1 terabyte of space, it's like you have a CPU dedicated to you. In VPSs, you still have people sharing the server resources with you. It's just that it's not much. So for instance, in a shared hosting environment, you can have like 1,000 people, 1,000 websites on the same server. In a VPS environment, you can have maybe like 7 or 10 people on the server. In a dedicated hosting environment, you own your server. So once your server has been rented, that server becomes yours for that period. The server is owned by you. Nobody else shares the resources of that server with you for the period that you have owned that server. Now, in the case of a dedicated hosting gives you your server is yours. And the distinction between all these types of servers, aside from the technical explanations I just did, one of the distinguishing factors between all these servers is the fact that for each of these server types, you find the price, the cost of getting the servers being different. Dedicated hosting has the most costs. It costs a lot of money to get a dedicated server. But as your needs grow and as your business grows, eventually, when you grow to a point, you end up at the point where you go for dedicated servers. But for a start, dedicated servers might not be, it might not be what you need to get. But then it's good that you have a clear understanding of all these server types, so that when you get to the point where you need them, you know what to do. So here you have an 8 gig RAM server with 1 terabyte of disk space, and then it's telling you it's an Intel Xenon CPU. And then the introductory offer of this server is already $89 per month. That's the introductory offer. So by the time you dig through, you would see that the cost of the server actually goes higher than that. And that's how dedicated servers work. So the moment you get to a point where you probably have a lot of customers, and then you want to graduate from just doing the regular shared hosting, you probably want to get a dedicated server. And then what you are now doing at that point is that you are allocating your dedicated server resources in such a way that those resources can now be turned into reseller hosting, it can be turned into VPSs, it can be turned into shared hosting and things like that. Now, where does reseller web hosting now come in? Because if you look here, you would see, oh, reseller. So how does reseller come in? Well, reseller hosting is actually a kind of shared hosting. That's it. It's a kind of shared hosting. What is just being done in a reseller hosting environment is just that the provider has given you the ability to create a business from their business. So you could, for instance, get a VPS and then turn that VPS into a shared hosting environment. How do I mean? So if you find a provider, for instance, and you say, okay, let me go for a VPS hosting. Once you get that VPS hosting, you could convert that VPS hosting into reseller hosting, into shared hosting. And shared hosting simply means that you now host a number of people on that your VPS server. So you can have, instead of you being the only one on the VPS server, you can share the space with other people. Think of it as you've gone out there and then you probably you rented a 4-bedroom flat, and then you felt, oh, this 4-bedroom flat is too big for me, and the cost is much per annum or per month. And then what you now do is that you now say, okay, out of this 4-bedroom flat, let me sublet 3 of the rooms, so I use only 1 room. And then you have 3 co-tenants who pay to you monthly, and then at the end of the month you pull all the money together and then you pay your landlord. So a VPS server is like that. So eventually what you do as a reseller is you could buy a VPS server and then you turn that VPS server into shared hosting, and then you resell that to your customers. But it is very important that you have a clear understanding of these different kinds of hosting, because it would really help you and it would give you a boost when you start setting up your business. Because in the next video, I'm going to be sharing with you control panels that you use to manage your web hosting business, and we'll look at that. And once we had done looking at the different types of control panel and the pros and cons, then the next thing you will need to do is you need to now shop for a provider. Because the best way to understand the web hosting business is actually to get your hands dirty and to try things out. So the moment you get a provider and you start trying things out, all these things get very, very, very clear, and you know how to package your business. So in summary, you have different kinds of hosting. You have shared hosting environments. A lot of people on the server. You have VPS servers, or VPS hosting, where you have less people on the server, but it comes at more costs. And then in VPS hosting, you have more control of your server. You can install whatever operating system you want on your server. For instance, you can reboot your server. You can do all of that on your VPS server. Then you have the dedicated hosting environment, where you can do everything you can do on a VPS server, but then on a dedicated hosting environment, the resources are yours. Then don't forget, shared hosting is cheap. VPS hosting is a little more expensive than shared hosting, and then dedicated servers are usually the most expensive. For instance, if you check the cost of dedicated servers on a site like resellerclub.com, you'll find out that to get started with just 20 gigabytes of dedicated server, you'll be paying, I think that's about $399 per month, and this is a bit high. Oh no, this is our VPS. Let me look at dedicated servers. So let's go to dedicated servers. Now for VPSs, like I said, they are a little bit more expensive than dedicated servers. But let's look at dedicated servers here, and you would see that usually they are a little bit more expensive. So you can see the dedicated server here is starting at around $80 per month. So usually, and that's just for 4 gig RAM. That's for 4 gig RAM. And if you're going to get a dedicated server for your web hosting business, you don't want 4 gig RAM. You probably want something like 32 gig RAM or 64 gig RAM if you are going to get a dedicated server for your hosting environment. So for those who will be taking this course and who would like to advance further into getting to the peak of the web hosting industry, you don't want to get 4 gig RAM. In those tutorials, you would see that we'll be talking about you getting maybe like a 32 gig RAM of server, 64 gig RAM of 64 gig RAM, and things like that. And then you want to get maybe like 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes, 4 terabytes of space, so that you have the flexibility to make maximum profits from your investments. Now, finally, the last type of hosting I would discuss in this video is what we call cloud hosting. Now, the difference between cloud hosting and regular web hosting is that in cloud hosting, what you are working with is a network of computers. Now, for the other types of hosting that I just described, the dedicated servers, the VPS servers, the shared hosting, what usually happens is that the server you are operating on is in one physical location. So when you are purchasing your server, if your server is in China, or your server is in South Africa, or your server is in the US, Chicago, or wherever it is, that server is going to be in that one location. And then everything you are doing on your server is tied to that physical location. Now, in cloud hosting environments, what has been done is that your files, your web hosting is actually operating on a network of computers. So you have computers probably in 2 or 3 locations forming a network, and then your hosting is done on that network. Now, usually this gives you the benefit of disaster recovery and things like that. So for instance, in the case of regular traditional hosting where your files are in one location, if a disaster occurs, then it affects that computer. But then in the case of the cloud kind of environment, if something happens, you have your files is in like a cluster. So one location going down does not really affect what happens to your files. So you have like a cluster. It's in the cloud, kind of. So it's a network. That's the distinction between cloud hosting and the regular hosting. But when you're getting started with your business, just like I explained earlier, you want to save costs, except when your clients specifically request for probably cloud hosting. So in order for you to save costs and be competitive in the marketplace, you may not want to go for such hosting like cloud hosting and things like that. You probably just want to stay and stick with the regular hosting, and then you start your business with that. And as your needs expand, as your business grows, as you get more customers, and as you get more comfortable with the business, as you get more technical expertise, because it's really very simple. The more you stay with the hosting business, the better you get at it. By the time we are done with these videos, you have a lot of technical knowledge, you know how to do a lot of things. But then the more you stay in the business, the better you get at it. And then once you start getting good at it, you can begin to explore options, and you can see how to scale your business even beyond the things being discussed in this video, and you just grow and scale your business. I'll see you in the next video, and we'll be talking about control panels, and we'll be talking about why you need to understand control panels, how to pick control panels, the control panels I would recommend to you as a starter, so that you can maximize your profit. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.